What's up, guys? In today's video, the Rusty Dog and I are on location at my brother-in-law's house, and the plan is that we're gonna extend this deck 10 feet this way. All right, let's get to it. All right, we're just gonna jump right in. What we're doing here is attaching what would be our rim joist to the side of the existing deck. As you can see, we have already taken down the railing for this side. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know if this is 100% the proper way to attach this board here, but I figured if we just attached it with enough nails and screws, then it shouldn't go anywhere, right? I mean, it's really only going to be supporting half of one deck board, so I think it's going to be totally fine. Some of the deck boards from the existing deck were overhanging a little bit, so I just cut them flush with my circular saw and then came in with my router and rounded them over for a nicer transition. Now, our plan is to run a board perpendicular to the deck boards on the existing deck and just use that as a transition between the new deck boards we're laying down. I think this will just be a much cleaner look when it comes to tying the two decks together. Alright, so what I'm doing right now is I'm just marking out my ledger board everywhere that I'm going to have my joists spaced out. I'm going ahead and figuring out my layout and making marks on this board so that we can get it attached to the house. Alright, and then you want to face the crown up. So what I'm doing is I'm going a step further. Okay. And instead of marking the center line, I'm going ahead and just marking out so we can just use these lines and set our joist up on that. So 1.5 inches. The center of this is like 16 inches. Now, since we're gonna have to attach this ledger board to a concrete foundation wall, our plan is to use some of these 5/8-inch concrete sleeve anchors. So here I'm marking out the placement of these anchors on the ledger board. Now, these are recommended to be spaced 2 inches from the top and bottom of the board. I also staggered these anchors every 16 inches all the way down my board. Once our marks were made for the anchors, we went ahead and drilled the holes through the ledger board. Now, we didn't have the proper size drill bit here, but hey, we got there eventually. All right, now it's time to get this ledger board attached to the house. We placed it all the way up against that first board we attached to the existing deck and checked for level. Once we had the board where we wanted it, we just secured it in place with a couple of Tapcon screws for now. Now, since you can't really install any sort of flashing when installing a ledger board on concrete, we left a bit of space behind the board for water to properly drain. Then it was time to get those concrete anchors installed. Now, I let Eric be the muscle for this step since I know how tough drilling into concrete can be. And there were like 7 holes that needed to be drilled, so this was quite the workout. Once the holes were drilled, he blew out some of that concrete dust and I hammered in those sleeve anchors. Now, once you tighten these things down, they expand into the concrete, holding everything in place. With our ledger board installed, we moved on to making the beam for this deck. Now, to create this beam, we placed 2 2x10s together and attached them with nails. I placed a line of 4 3-inch nails every 13 inches down the beam, and then we flipped the beam over and did the same thing on the other side. This sort of just sandwiches the 2 pieces together. All I have to say is that I was extremely thankful to have this framing nailer for this step. I ended up borrowing this thing from my brother for this project, and it was worth its weight in gold. Otherwise, this step would have taken much, much longer. Now it's time to notch our 6x6 post to accept that nice beam we just constructed. Now notching 6x6s are always a bit of a battle for me. I start by marking everything out on all sides of the 6x6. With everything marked, I get to work cutting to my marks with my circular saw. This doesn't cut all the way through, so then I come in with a reciprocating saw to try and cut all the way through. And lastly, I finish it off with a crowbar and a little brute string. At this point, my brother-in-law's brother, better known as my husband, showed up, and he helped me measure for the height of these notch posts. Once we had our measurements locked down, we cut our first post to size before calling it for the day. The next day, we got to work on setting our post in place. Now, I didn't show the process for pouring these foundation piers because, well, I had nothing to do with it. These were the result of all of Eric's hard work digging and pouring the concrete for these piers that our posts can sit on. Now, since we wanted to tackle this deck build in a weekend, that meant having these footings poured earlier so they had enough time to fully cure was necessary. Now that they're nice and solid, we can install our posts onto these brackets that will be placed on the concrete. To install the post to this bracket, we're attaching it with number 9 SD connector screws. You can find these screws in the same aisle as the post brackets in your big box stores. Once our posts were set, we placed our beam. Actually, I shouldn't say we here. Phil and Eric placed our beam on our posts. That beam was very heavy, so I let them tackle it. With our beam now resting on our post, we double checked for level and then added some galvanized carriage bolts to tie our beam and post together. Alright, we can finally add some joists to this deck. Since I'd already laid out where our joists would be on our ledger board, this went pretty quickly. All we had to do was line up our 2x10 joists with those marks, making sure we were flush on the top, and then installed our joist hanger brackets with more of those SD screws. This is where having a couple of hands to hold up those 2x10s really helps because, whew, those things are heavy. Then we worked on spacing out the joists so that the spacing was even on each side and the deck was square. Once we're happy with our spacing, we tied the joists to our beam with some hurricane ties. Now, it might have also made more sense to install the rim joists first and then install the brackets, I'm not exactly sure what the correct order of operation is here, but this way seemed to work too. Now we intentionally left our joists long so that we could get them to the exact length that would be needed for attaching our rim joist flush to the existing deck. To get everything flush, we ran a chalk line from the existing deck across all of the joists and made a mark. Once we had a chalk line to reference from, I used my speed square to transfer a line down each joist, and then I cut each joist individually with my circular saw. With all of the joists cut to length, we could go ahead and attach that rim joist into all of the other joists with nails. Then we added in a little blocking to help stiffen up those joists. Now we didn't happen to have any leftover 2x10 to use as blocking, so we just used some 2x6 that we had. And it did help secure everything together a little more. Next, it was time to get our 4x4 post attached for installing our railing. Now we set our 4x4 in place and then just ran a board from the existing deck to figure out what height we needed the 4x4 to be for everything to be level. Once we had that established, we could get our 4x4 post attached to the deck. I first attached it with a couple of deck screws just to hold it in place, and then we came in and attached it with some headlock screws. Now these headlock screws just serve as a replacement to having to use something like carriage bolts or lag screws here. So Phil and I had started to notice that the Rusty Dog was looking a little too dry, so we found him this little pool at a store nearby for $10. He could barely fit in it, but it kept him nice and cool on the job site. With our first 4x4 post attached, we could set the height for the rest of the posts and attach them in the same manner. Now we added 3 posts on this side because the plan is to eventually add a gate to this area where the stairs will be. Once all of the posts were attached, we came behind and added some blocking around each of the posts. Then it was time to start attaching our deck boards. Now this always feels like the step in every deck build for me where you start to feel like you're getting really close to that finish line. So we just started laying down boards and getting them attached with 3-inch deck screws. It wasn't until after they were all attached that we noticed they were just slightly off center from the boards on the existing deck. Honestly, we didn't even think to check in the moment, we were just on a roll. I think what might have happened is that the old boards were put down with no spacing in between the boards and they just naturally created spacing as they dried, whereas on the new side of the deck we used a shim between each board. It might have shifted everything over just a tad, but we were way too tired to pull them all up and start over. And honestly, you probably would have never noticed if I didn't say something, would you? Yeah, that's what I thought. Anyways, moving on. While those guys were busy laying down deck boards, Eric and I started digging up a spot where we could land some pavers for the stair treads to land on. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail here in regards to adding these steps because guess what? I already have a video on my channel about adding stairs to a deck, so if you're extra curious how to do it, well, then you're just going to have to go watch that video. And if you enjoyed that video, well, then you better just go ahead and get subscribed. What do you say? Now, we didn't have time to build the gate or the handrail for these stairs, so that's something that he's going to have to finish up on his own. I mean, there's only so much we can get done in a weekend, and I think we did pretty good considering. Lastly, we got those railing balusters attached to the side of the deck. We just made a little jig for this using a 2x4 as a spacer and tacked these all in place with that nail gun. Then we capped it off with a final board that would sit on top of the railing. This might have been the easiest board of all to attach since, as you can see, now I had a very helpful assistant handing me all of the screws this time. So our goal was to try and match the existing deck as much as possible, and I think we were able to achieve that. We took a 10 foot by 10 foot builder grade deck and turned it into a 10 foot by 20 foot deck with stairs for accessing the backyard. A big upgrade in my opinion. There were definitely some lessons learned that I can take into my next deck build, which is always kind of my personal goal, to get more educated and skilled with each build. I have a good feeling that they're going to get so much use out of having an outdoor space that is now doubled in size, and I'm happy to have been a part of this transformation. If you guys enjoyed this video, if you could do me a favor and give it a like or leave a comment or maybe even subscribe. Any of those small acts of kindness on your end really help my small channel continue to grow, and I'd very much appreciate it. All right guys, and that's how you extend an existing deck in a weekend. Thanks so much for watching, but
I'm pretty tired. I think I'll go home now.
I'll see you for the next one. Bye.